New York, 1956. Bright lights, buzzing cameras, and Elvis Presley at the height of his meteoric rise. A reporter leaned forward, smirking, his question sharp as a knife. The crowd chuckled till Elvis answered, and the room fell silent. If stories like this remind you why legends endure, stick around and share this video with someone who remembers the early days of rock and roll. A flashbulb pops. The sudden burst of light slices across the small New York studio, reflecting off the polished metal legs of the interview table. Elvis Presley, just 21 years old, shifts in his chair. The guitar leaning beside him gleams under the studio lamps. A quiet reminder of the songs that put him in this chair tonight. The room is thick with heat from the lights overhead. A low hum buzzes from the cameras as their reels turn. The audience, half reporters, half invited guests, rustle their papers and cough into their hands. There's a restlessness in the air, like everyone is waiting for a show. But not the kind Elvis is used to giving. It's 1956, and Heartbreak Hotel has exploded across radios nationwide. Elvis is no longer just a singer from Memphis. He is a cultural flashpoint. Parents scowl. Teenagers scream. Every twitch of his hips seems to divide the country. Tonight, under the glare of studio lights, he sits face to face with the press, the very people who can either crown him or crush him. One journalist in particular leans forward. He's older, grey at the temples, his suit pressed sharp. He has a reputation for asking the questions others won't. His smirk is visible even before he opens his mouth. He taps his pen against his notepad once, twice like a drummer setting tempo. The noise in the studio dips. Even the camera operators glance sideways, sensing something about to happen. Mr. Presley, the reporter begins, voice slow and deliberate. They say rock and roll is just noise. Do you really think it will last? A ripple of chuckles sweeps the room. A few heads nod, amused by the bluntness. One woman in the second row shakes her head, as if already pitying Elvis for what's coming. The young star doesn't answer right away. He blinks against the flash of another camera, the sweat on his brow catching the light. His fingers tighten on the armrest, then relax. He shifts slightly in his seat, gaze dropping to the floor for a beat too long. Behind the cameras, a producer mouths something to an assistant, maybe, a signal to cut away if things get awkward. The tension is thick, almost visible, like smoke curling under the ceiling. Lights dot. Elvis raises his eyes again. His lips twitch, the faintest suggestion of a smile or maybe a sneer. No one can tell which dot. The crowd leans forward. Is he about to laugh it off? Snap back? Freeze under the pressure? The reporter adjusts his tie, emboldened by the silence. He smirks again, as though certain he's thrown the young singer off balance. Elvis draws in a breath. The air seems to shift with him. His hands fold loosely in his lap, but his eyes steady, unblinking lock on the man across the table. And in that moment, with every ear straining for the next word, the question isn't about rock and roll anymore. It's about whether Elvis Presley can hold his ground when the world is watching. He lowers his gaze once more. Lips twitch. Is it laughter? Or the beginning of something sharper? The reporter leans closer, voice dripping with sarcasm. His words are sharp, each one delivered like he's speaking not to Elvis, but to the crowd behind him. Some call you a passing fad, he says. A hillbilly act in rhinestones. The insult hangs in the air. Gasps ripple through the room, quiet but undeniable. A few stifled laughs follow, nervous and unsure. The sharp click-click of a camera shutter punctuates the moment. Elvis doesn't move. His hands stay clasped in front of him, thumbs rubbing together slowly. The light catches the curve of his sideburns, the fabric of his jacket. He looks young, too young, some might think. To be under this kind of fire, the reporter pushes further, his voice rising with confidence now. That accent of yours, those moves. Vulgar, some say. Just a boy shaking himself silly while the children scream. The cameramen glance at each other, their eyes wide. One tilts his camera down slightly, whispering under his breath, "Do we cut?" The other shakes his head, eyes locked on Elvis. The audience buzzes, restless. Half expect Elvis to crumble under the weight of ridicule. The other half, waiting for the famous Presley temper to ignite. But Elvis leans forward, slowly, deliberately. The sound of the chair creaking echoes louder than it should. He rests his elbows on his knees, clasping his hands tighter now, and fixes his gaze on the reporter. It's a steady, unflinching look, one that cuts through the man's smirk like a knife. For a long, unbearable beat, the room is silent. The hum of the studio lights grows louder in the stillness. Someone coughs nervously in the back row. A paper crinkles in the hand of a young assistant, too afraid to move. Elvis doesn't blink. He doesn't fidget. He just stares, calm but burning with something the crowd can't quite name. The reporter shifts uncomfortably in his seat. For the first time, the grin falters. His pen, once tapping confidently, stills against the notepad. Elvis parts his lips, ready to speak. The crowd braces, leaning in. Every camera tilts closer, every microphone live, waiting for the explosion that seems inevitable, but it doesn't come. Instead, his voice is soft, steady, almost too quiet, sir. He begins, his tone carrying no trace of anger. I don't pretend to be anything I'm not. The room freezes. Even the skeptical producer behind the glass leans closer to the monitor. Elvis pauses, letting the words hang. His eyes flicker downward for a split second, then back to the reporter's face. I sing the way I feel. The crowd stirs. Some shift uncomfortably, as though expecting more. Others exchange glances, sensing that something has shifted but not sure what. The reporter swallows, blinking against the heat of the lights. He forces a laugh, trying to regain control of the moment. He leans forward again, voice sharp, desperate to reclaim the upper hand. But isn't it vulgar? He sneers. This, shaking, this performance. Is that really music? The audience holds its breath. The cameramen stop moving. Elvis's silence stretches, heavier this time, and then he opens his mouth to speak. But what comes out isn't anger. It isn't defense. It shocks the room. Elvis doesn't raise his voice, he lowers it. The tension in the room snaps tighter, as though every person has leaned forward at once. His drawl, softened by Mississippi roots, rolls out slow and measured. Sir, he says again, his tone almost gentle. I don't pretend to be anything I'm not. The words land heavier than if he had shouted. His voice carries not through force, but through conviction. A hush blankets the studio. The buzz of the lights becomes a background hum, and the faint squeak of a chair leg on the polished floor sounds too loud. Reporters shift in their seats, caught between scribbling notes and simply watching. Elvis adjusts his collar with a small tug, then leans back in his chair. His posture relaxes, but his eyes remain fixed on the man across from him. He lets the silence stretch, long enough for the tension to grow uncomfortable. Then comes the line, I sing the way I feel. It's plain, stripped of any cleverness, but it lands with a weight that fills the studio. Some in the audience nod instinctively, while others glance around, realizing this wasn't the weak defense they expected. A woman in the second row bites her lip, her expression softening. A younger journalist scribbles furiously, sensing that the quote will travel far beyond these studio walls. And then Elvis adds, almost with a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, if that makes people happy, then maybe it's more than noise. The reporter stiffens. His smirk falters again, but this time there's a flash of unease behind his eyes. He shifts in his chair, suddenly aware of the cameras catching every movement. The crowd, once restless, now sits in a stunned calm. Some exchange glances, the question written silently on their faces. Had Elvis just turned the entire moment on its head? The cameramen sense it too. One zooms tighter on Elvis's face, the sweat on his temple glistening under the light. The other tilts down slightly, catching the movement of Elvis's hand still folded. Calm, steady. The reporter clears his throat, desperate to break the spell. His pen begins tapping again, faster this time, so he starts, his voice higher pitched now. You think shaking and gyrating on stage, this spectacle is respectable. You call that art. The words sound less like an attack now and more like a plea. The reporter, once confident, is scrambling. Elvis doesn't blink. He leans forward, elbows on his knees again. His voice is low but firm. Sir, I just sing, however my body moves when I do. Well, that's the truth coming out. Murmurs ripple across the audience. Some reporters nod. A few clap, softly, quickly stifled. The mocking journalist stammers, his smirk reduced to a tight line. He reaches for his water glass, but sets it down untouched. For a moment, it looks as though he might retreat. But pride won't let him. He straightens his tie, forces another smile, and launches one more jab. But isn't it vulgar? He presses, louder this time, his voice cutting through the quiet. A young man twisting his body in front of screaming children. What kind of example is that? The crowd flinches at the bluntness. The tension, eased for a moment, snaps back sharp, and this time Elvis's reply cuts deeper. The audience leans forward, waiting for Elvis's reply, for a heartbeat. The studio feels like it has stopped breathing. The hum of the overhead lights, the faint whir of the cameras, even the shuffle of notes in a reporter's hand, everything fades. Under the weight of silence, Elvis straightens in his chair. Slowly, deliberately, he doesn't fidget. He doesn't rush. His jaw sets firm, his chest rises with one measured breath. Then his eyes lock on the reporter, sharp and unwavering. If moving when I sing is vulgar, he says, pausing just long enough for the words to sink in, then I guess we'd all been vulgar since Sunday morning in church. The room explodes. Laughter breaks first, quick and bright, rippling through the rows of reporters. Then applause erupts, hands smacking together, louder and faster until the sound swells like a wave against the studio walls. The camera crew can't contain themselves. One cameraman grins wide behind the lens. The other lets out a short laugh before clamping his hand over his mouth. Even a few hardened journalists crack smiles, their pens pausing mid-sentence. The reporter, caught off guard, blinks hard. His smirk is gone. His face reddens under the glow of the lights. He leans back in his chair, as if the force of the crowd's reaction has physically pushed him away from the table. Elvis doesn't gloat. He doesn't even smile. He sits back down lightly, folding his hands once more in his lap, calm as a preacher after delivering a Sunday sermon. The applause grows into cheers. A woman in the second row claps so hard her notepad tumbles to the floor. Another reporter leans to his colleague and whispers, "That's the quote. That's the one." The energy in the room has flipped. What began as ridicule has become respect, almost reverence. The same people who chuckled at Elvis minutes ago now watch him with a new gravity, as though realizing this young man is more than just swiveling hips and catchy songs, and Elvis knows it. He sits steady, his eyes scanning the room, not arrogant, but aware. The mocking journalist clears his throat, fumbling for control. He reaches for his water glass, takes a quick sip, and tries to smile again. But the damage is done. The crowd isn't laughing at Elvis anymore. They're laughing with him. A producer in the booth leans toward the glass, whispering urgently to his assistant. "Cut to commercial," he hisses. "Now," before it goes off script. But on the studio floor, Elvis isn't done. He leans forward again, his voice calm but stronger this time. "I don't mean no disrespect," he says, looking straight at the reporter, "but I can't sing and stand still. Never could. If folks call that vulgar, maybe they just never listened close enough." The crowd cheers again, louder than before. The echo of clapping hands and laughter fills the studio until the walls themselves seem to vibrate. The reporter tries to speak, but his words are drowned out by the noise. He sets his pen down, defeated, staring down at his notes without reading them. Elvis nods once to the crowd, acknowledging their energy, then turns back calmly to the table. His presence fills the room, not loud, not flashy, but undeniable. In the booth, the producer waves his arms, frantic. Cut it now." But the cameras are still rolling, and Elvis, unfazed by the chaos behind the glass, keeps going. The applause dies down slowly, like a wave pulling back from the shore. A few claps linger, scattered, then fade into nothing. And in the quiet that follows, it is Elvis's voice that fills the space. "I'm just doing what comes natural," he says, steady but soft. His drawl is calm now, his tone stripped of defense. Folks can call it what they want. The words hang in the air. No retort, no clever punchline. Just the plain truth. The mocking reporter shifts in his chair, red creeping up his neck. He drops his gaze to his notes, flipping a page that doesn't need flipping. His pen trembles against the paper, a nervous scratch that fails to break the silence. For the first time all night, the studio isn't buzzing with noise. It isn't restless with doubt. It is still, so still that the hum of the microphones feels louder than before. The smell of hot bulbs above mixes with the faint whiff of ink and newsprint from the reporter's pads. Every detail sharpens in the stillness. Witnesses recall that Elvis didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply sat there, posture straight, hands folded lightly. His eyes soft but unflinching, and that restraint did more than any outburst could have. One young journalist in the back row scribbles a line into his notebook. Presley silenced the room. Another reporter, older, leans back and exhales through his nose, as though conceding something he hadn't wanted to admit. The audience, once split between skeptics and supporters, now leans as one. They aren't just watching a singer defend himself. They are witnessing a man holding his ground with grace. The reporter who mocked him swallows hard. He forces a smile, but it doesn't reach his eyes. His earlier bravado has drained away, leaving only the uncomfortable reality that he has been outmaneuvered, not with sharpness, but with humility. Elvis glances toward him once more, not with malice, but almost with pity. Then he turns his gaze outward, toward the rest of the studio. "I never wanted to make anybody upset," he continues, his voice steady. "I just wanted to sing what I feel." The crowd shifts again. This time there are nods, genuine and unforced. A woman in the second row wipes her eyes with the corner of her handkerchief. A cameraman, still rolling, whispers to himself, "He's good. Real good." The mocking reporter lowers his pen. His smirk is gone for good. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't push further. Instead, he bows his head slightly, as though conceding defeat, and in that quiet, the story changes. Elvis, the boy from Tupelo, has transformed in front of their eyes, not by raising his voice, not by striking back, but by refusing to sink to mockery's level. The applause that returns isn't raucous. It isn't wild. It's softer, steadier, carried by genuine respect. Hands clap in rhythm, not out of spectacle, but out of recognition. Some say you could feel the shift even after the cameras cut, that when the lights dimmed and the chairs scraped against the studio floor, people walked out quieter than they had come in. It wasn't silence born of discomfort anymore. It was silence born of reverence. But the real twist of this story wasn't in the room at all. It came later, days later, when the same reporter who mocked Elvis would receive something in the mail that no one expected. Days later, the same reporter sat at his desk, a stack of papers piled high beside a cold cup of coffee. The newsroom clattered with typewriters, phones ringing, voices shouting over deadlines. Then came a small interruption, a package placed quietly on his desk. Brown paper, string-tied neat. No return address at first glance, just his name written in looping ink. Curious, he tugged the knot loose. The paper fell away. Inside lay a black and white photograph of Elvis Presley. Signed in smooth blue ink were the words, "Thanks for keeping me on my toes." EP, the reporter froze. His pen slipped from his fingers, clattering against the desk. For a long moment, he didn't move. Colleagues glanced over, curious, but he said nothing. Slowly, almost reverently, he lifted the photo from the wrapping. He turned it in his hands, staring at the neat script. This wasn't a taunt. It wasn't spite. It was something far harder to ignore. Grace under fire. According to accounts, that very photo was later framed and hung on the wall of his office. The same man who once mocked Elvis now displayed the signed picture proudly, as if the moment had changed him. Word of the gesture spread, not in headlines, but in quiet stories told among colleagues and passed down over years. And in every retelling, the moral stayed the same. Elvis Presley didn't silence his critics with anger. He silenced them with dignity. The boy from Tupelo, the one accused of being nothing more than noise, left even his harshest doubter with respect he could never laugh away. One act of humility, one act of kindness stronger than any outburst could ever be. Stories like this became part of Elvis's legend. Fans remember the music, the energy, the shows, but just as often, they remember the moments when he carried himself not as a star, but as a man who understood that sometimes silence speaks louder than applause. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes respect speaks louder than ridicule. And tell us in the comments if you were in Elvis's shoes that night, what would you have said?